One of my reoccurring dreams I've probably shared with you before, but I'm in high school. I'm back in high school. I'm on the upper floor, the second floor of the campus, and I'm standing at my locker. The locker's open. I'm getting a couple of books or whatever out of my locker. One of my friends approaches me and he says to me, "Are you ready for this test?" And I have this feeling of like dread, like, oh, I forgot about the test, and man, am I even gonna pass it? And if I don't, do I still get to play basketball? And just all the pressures of the test. And this is 100% true what I'm about to tell you. Every time that I have that dream, I wake up and there's this joy in my heart that I never again have to take a test. And the joy is so incredible that sometimes I literally lay in bed and get goosebumps at the thought of never having to take a test again. I have that dream often. Another dream, not so funny, that is reoccurring for me, and I don't know what it means, and if you know, don't tell me, I don't want to know, but I have this dream that I'm either standing in a field or maybe in the street, it doesn't matter, but I'm just standing some random location, and I can tell there's something or someone coming after me. I can tell that there's a storm that is coming, and I turn to run, and I can't get my legs to work right, and it's a struggle. It's like I've had a stroke or I'm partially paralyzed, and I'm just trying to get away, and this storm that's coming, this person or this thing is unhindered, and it's running at me full speed, and I just can't get my legs to go. It's like I'm running in sand or running in really soft mud, and I'm making progress. I'm getting somewhere, but at the end of the day, I know the storm is going to catch up with me. Today, I want to shift our focus a little bit on the storm and talk about how to navigate the storm. How to take some weight off and begin to do exactly what you're supposed to be doing in the storm. So far in this series, almost every week as we've been talking about how to survive the storm, we've been talking about kind of standing on a foundation, being firm. One week we talked about surrender, in other words, allowing God to have complete control even when you're in the storm. One week we kind of went off on a little tangent, just some stuff that God is putting in my heart about suicide, but we talked about that God has purpose and direction, that even in the storm there's something that God has called you to do. Last week we heard Melissa's testimony and how lies led her to a dark place and the truth set her free. We talked about believing the truth even when you're in the middle of the storm. Today I want to talk about our role, what it is you and I are supposed to do when the storm is coming. What I have found, something that I feel is changing, again in this generation and in our current culture, is when something bad happens to us, when the storm is coming, instead of preparing to fight, we just kind of sit down and become the martyr. We take on this spirit of martyrdom. Like, I'll just wait out this storm. I mean, it's not really my fault, it's somebody else's fault anyway, and I really don't care. We feel like we don't have to do anything for the storm that is crashing down on us all the time. Now, you may or may not know this, but this is not at all biblical. This is not what the Bible tells us to do when a storm is approaching. There's action. There's something that we need to do. Listen, even if you're in a storm and it's 95% someone else's fault, hey man, you got 5% you got to deal with. You got 5% that is up to you and God to get figured out. I want to share just a few verses here about this. I want to prove this to you. The first one's one we're all familiar with, but maybe not in this context. This is in Matthew. if your brother or sister sins, in other words, if your brother or sister sins against you, they are causing the storm. They are the ones that are causing you all these challenges and problems, and your relationship is on the rocks, and it's horrible. And we sit here and go, well, it's their fault. Like, they need to deal with it. Why should I have to do anything? This is not my fault. And if we're not careful, we get to the point where we almost enjoy the chair. We get to the place where, yes, this is somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. I'm just going to sit here because I'm better than you and I'm righteous, and this is how we feel. He says, but if your brother or sister sins, it says, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. Like, that doesn't make any sense in our current culture, that if somebody has hurt me, I'm supposed to go to them and discuss it with them. Imagine if our media said this. If somebody said something sexist or racist or whatever, and instead of going to the media, or this is what we really do, we go to Facebook, and we what if we went and sat down? There was a time towards the beginning of our current presidency where I wondered if anybody ever had real conversations. Like, did you ever sit down? And then I realized they don't want things to be right. They just want to fight all the time. And so they're all just sitting in their chairs fighting. Christians, that is not what we are called to do. We're called to be different than this. If your brother sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. And if they listen, awesome, the storm's over. You've won that storm. Now, if they don't listen to you, well, you did your best, so go sit back in your chair. No, Matthew goes beyond that. He goes, if they will not listen, take a couple more people and go talk to them again. And if you were to keep reading, it says, and if that doesn't work and the storm still hasn't been settled, go in front of the whole church and get it dealt with. I mean, his heart is to get rid of the storm and to find peace again within the church. But we don't want that. We just want to sit in our chair and complain that somebody did something they weren't supposed to do and it offended me. This is all through Scripture. This is James 5:13. Is any of you in trouble? Then go home and watch Netflix for a while. Right? Is any of you struggling? Well, go get a bucket of ice cream and sit down in front of your TV. It doesn't say this. It says, if any of you is in trouble, if any of you is struggling, man, spend time seeking God. Spend time praying. God, I'm in this storm. I don't know where to go or what to do. I don't know how to handle the storm. Let him pray. I don't think it's coincidence that right after that he says, and then if you're happy, if things are good, then you should spend time praising God. James 5:14, if is any one of you sick, right? Have you ever been in a place, I've been here, not recently, but I've been in a place where sickness is almost like a relief. You're like, oh man, I've been so busy and so tired, and I just want to go home and do nothing for a while, rest, sleep in, right? Just because our body... The problem is that we're so busy that we're not balanced in our life, and our body ends up shutting us down and making us sick. But he says, if any of you is sick, this is what you do. If that is your storm, this is it. Call the elders of the church, pray over them, and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And then James goes on, if you're to read some more of that, and he says, and this will make them better. This will help get rid of the storm. The storm that you are in, whether it is financial, there's something you can do. If it's emotional, there's something you can do. If there's relational, there's something you can do. Now, I got to say this. I understand that occasionally there are storms that are so severe and we have zero control over it. I get that. I understand that fully. But I'm saying most storms, the storms that you are dealing with right now, there is something that you can do. There's something you can navigate, something you can just shift or work at or talk to, or something you can do to help get that storm, make that storm better. This is Matthew chapter 5. He's talking about adultery and lust of the mind. This is where he's just getting real candid about how we're supposed to do things. says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. This is him talking about lust and saying, listen, if you're struggling with what your eye sees, if you're struggling with what you're doing, like, you got to deal with that. You can't just like, how many times have we sat across from somebody who just said, well, I've tried, I don't know. I'm never going to be able to quit, or it's my addiction. It's my one thing. I just got my one little vice, and that's not scriptural, folks, friends, church. It's saying, listen, whatever that storm is, that addiction storm, there is something you can do. There is somebody you can talk to, but you got to get up in the middle of the storm. You got to get out of that chair of martyrdom and begin to go do something. Begin to reach out to those around you. You can find accountability. You can find plans. You can find people to pray for you. There are software solutions. There are a ton of things you can do to begin to crawl out of that storm. And if we're not careful, we just begin to enjoy and love the storm. And these last 3 weeks, it was like how to survive and how to manage. And I felt like God was saying, sometimes you and I, we got to take responsibility for the storm that we are partially creating. And we have to do what is right to help get over that storm. This is out of the book of James. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should just give up and not try anymore. If you don't know, you just don't know. Man, I figured, I see kind of two mentalities here. One is, no matter what the problem is, I'm going to figure it out. Or two is, I don't know. We'll have to ask somebody else. There's a friend of mine, Clint Keeley. I don't know if he's in the house today, but he came one day to help me work on my car, and I was trying. I was doing everything I could, and so I called in a pro to help, and he kind of troubleshot some stuff with my brakes, and then he's like, well, what do you have laying around here? And it was like a MacGyver moment. And I'm like going through, I'm finding some tape and some random stuff, and he gets it all done, and he puts it back together. He goes, man, that'll last forever. I mean, it was like, that's rock solid. And he was sincere. He's not a jokey guy. He was like, trust me, that'll be great, and those brakes will last longer than your car, which is probably true because I have a 30-year-old car. But he was just saying, like, it's going to be good. And as I watched his work ethic, as I was watching him do things, it was like he never said, well, we got to go order something offline and wait a couple of weeks, or, hey, man, looks like we can't do it. He just had this mentality that I'm going to get it done. Christians, you and I need that mentality. When it comes to this building, man, I'm telling you, there's gonna be challenges. There's gonna be things that are just tough. And we have two choices. We can just go, well, I don't know. I guess somebody else will have to do it. Or we can jump in and say, we're gonna make this happen, and we're gonna knock out walls, and we're gonna paint walls, and we're gonna not order. Wait, is that the right order? Whatever. But we're going to make it happen. Like, there's got to be a mentality that, hey, this is what God has called us to, and it doesn't matter what storm comes our way. We're going to press on and do what God has asked us to do. So if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously. We did a sermon on this a year ago. Who gives generously to, what's the word there? To all, to everybody. And I believe when James is writing this, he's saying, Christian, non-Christian, whoever, if you seek God and ask for wisdom, he will give generously to everyone without finding fault. In other words, even if you're totally guilty of something, like you're totally stuck in an addiction, or you're stuck with some crazy marital problem, or some crazy emotional, relational, whatever problem you got, God's not going to find fault in this moment that you ask for wisdom. When you humble yourself, you say, God, I need help with this thing. God, I do not know what I am doing. It says, to all of us in this room, he will give you direction. He will help you understand how to navigate your little part of that storm without finding fault. It will be given to you. Now, he goes on to give us this warning. He says, when you ask, you have to believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive wisdom from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So when we ask, there's got to be something in us that says, all right, God, I believe you have the answer to this question. One more I'll just throw out there, what to do in a storm. This says, Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything. In other words, if you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling an anxiousness, if you're feeling like, oh, what's going to happen? It says in prayer, in these situations, by prayer and petition, being thankful, present your request to God. So you're nervous about what's going to happen. God, are we going to get this building? God, are we going to reconcile this relationship? God, am I ever going to talk to my kid again? Whatever that thing is that you're dealing with, it says you seek God, you petition God, but you do it with thanksgiving. God, I'm thankful for what I already have. God, we're excited about this building, but we're thankful that we have a place today where it's warm and we can meet and worship and celebrate. That in thanksgiving, that overcomes that anxiousness. Whatever your storm is, whatever it is that you're going through, there is something you can do to make progress, to begin to get out of that storm. I want to share with you a testimony. We've been watching, like kind of long testimonies every week. And of all the stories, Dar's story you're about to hear, man, she's got a novel worth of stuff. And we had to cut it down to a shorter amount of time. But I want you to hear at what point she says, you know what, I've got to do something about the storm that I'm in. And when she began to step out of the storm, how God showed up in her life. Here it comes.
I was brought up in what I call dysfunctional Christian home. My parents went to a Christian Reformed church, and us kids went to a Christian school. I really think that it's where I got my roots. And I think that's very important because I knew when I drifted off exactly where to go back when I was hurting and needed God back in my life. The thing about my childhood was my dad, rather than doing discipline to teach us lessons, he was more abusive. The first boyfriend I ever had was at 15 years old, and I got married when I was 16, but then was divorced at 20. It just didn't work out just like everyone said it wouldn't. Then I met my second husband, and after we got married, he kind of introduced me to drugs. We did that for quite a few years, just partying with no children. It got out of control. And mostly I think it got out of control for him. He became verbally and physically abusive towards me, and kept getting in trouble with the law. But then when I was 30 years old, I found out that I was pregnant, and I stopped using, but it was just for a short time. And I think that's when I realized that I was really addicted. My husband kept getting into more and more trouble with the law, and he had several DUIs. I know one time he got, it was his birthday, and he called me early in the morning and said he was in jail for a DUI. I bailed him out, and he ended up in jail with another DUI that night. So he actually had 2 DUIs in one day, and it was his birthday. But knew when he went back to court that it meant prison. And so he badgered and pressured me to run away with him. He promised that he would quit drinking and that we would have a good life here in Boise. So we packed everything that we had or that we could in the car, and we came out to Boise. Then came one day when he was very, very angry, and he was beating me, and the straw, I guess, that broke the camel's back was the fact that he spit in my face. I was totally devastated. I'd been beaten for over 20 years by him, but once that happened, that was it. I just knew right then that that was the lowest thing he could have ever done to me. So I told my son, who was probably about 11 years old then, who actually had been trained all his life to run and go wherever I told him at any point in his life. He always had his backpack packed the night before, because so many times in the middle of the night we had to run. He was totally brought up to know that we would have to run at some point in the middle of the night. And so I told him to get in the car and lock the doors and not to open the door until I got there. Well, I got there almost to the car, and I looked back and I saw my husband running with a baseball bat in his hand. And I was so scared, but I made it to the car and got the door shut and locked, got the car started, and smashed. He had smashed the windshield with the baseball bat, and it was just hanging there. So my son put his feet up to hold the windshield in place while I drove off. Then in my rearview mirror, I saw him coming after us, chasing us in his car. Found a payphone, and I called the Boise police and said, I'd like to report someone drunk driving on the interstate, and gave them the description of the car, and sure enough, they picked him up for drunk driving. But they didn't charge him here in Boise because they wanted to just extradite him back to Michigan, which they did. And I never heard how many years in prison he ever received, but I did get a letter stating that about 5 years later that he had died in prison. Then I met Dan. He was very loving and very caring. He treated me with respect and always cherished me. We had a wonderful life together, but 4 years into our marriage, he got cancer and he died. And that's when my life really changed to the worst. I was just devastated that he was gone. I was heartbroken. I was so scared. I had been married like all my life, and now all of a sudden I was alone. I was just in so much pain that I turned to drugs and alcohol once again in my life, using them to relieve the pain, but they really didn't. As a matter of fact, they caused more pain. So my counselor told me I needed to work on forgiveness, to review my life and forgive everyone that had ever hurt me. I had to reflect back on all of the times that my father had hurt me, not just physically, but in my heart. He was a name caller, and that was really tough. And my abusive husband, I had to try to forgive him for all the beatings. It took me the whole weekend. I cried, and I had to go straight to God and say, please help me do this. I don't feel like I can do this alone. I hadn't really given my life over to God yet at that point, but I knew enough to be able to call on Him and ask Him to help me when I was doing something like forgiveness. And as I was going through all the forgiveness, I could feel, honestly, I could feel like I had this garbage can overstuffed with all this hurt and pain, and I could feel it getting lighter and lighter as I was forgiving. Forgiving was cleansing my soul and making me feel whole again. Life was getting so much better. A dear friend of mine invited me to Canyon Ridge. She invited me to join a small group. That small group has helped me to understand myself so much better, and I was able to share with close friends, people that I trusted, and I knew that what I had said there would go no further. We've become really, really close in the last, I think maybe 6 or 7 years, and I call them my beautiful sisters in Christ, and the lifelong friends that I made.
Before you clap, I want you to know that Darlene has been sober for 20 years. Isn't that incredible? The moment that she decided to leave an abusive relationship, the moment she risked it all and decided to leave that storm was never her fault. Can we agree on that? That storm was never her fault. But she chose to leave the storm. Sometimes you're in a storm that you can't get out of. It's the white squall that just comes crashing down and you don't see it coming. That's a boat analogy. But there are times when we're in storms that we can absolutely get out of. I studied this week just for my own fun what to do if you're in a good-sized ship or boat and a storm is coming. And the automatic thing that I was thinking is you just drop the heaviest anchor you can and you hold on, but that's the exact wrong thing to do. If you just sit there, the storm will kill you. Every cubic foot of water weighs 64 pounds, and that water will come crashing down on your boat and break it. It will break your boat. And so there's a very purposeful thing you do that you face about 45 degrees into the wave, not head on, but definitely not to the side, and you never stop moving. That was the number one thing all the articles said. You never stop moving. In fact, they have special sails just for storms that you put up that are close to the floor, close to the boat, and they're not very big because the wind is so great that you just need a small sail. So it's a small, really strong sail that you put up, and it keeps your boat moving, and you can withstand that storm. Let me encourage you. Whatever storm you're in, seek God for some wisdom. Go talk to somebody if you need to. Go deal with your storm. But the days of just sitting in the chair waiting for it to pass have got to be over. There's a passage in the book of Hebrews you've heard before, but I think it fits perfectly for this sermon. It says, that was the longest introduction I could do for a verse. Therefore, it says, since we are surrounded by such a great crowd of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with the perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Christians, whatever your storm is this week, maybe it's one that has just been going on for a decade, for a year, for a month, whatever it is. It's just always been there. Stop sitting in the chair, enjoying a spirit of martyrdom, and begin to go conquer what God has called you to do. Let's pray together.